A teenager walks into court, wearing nothing but a plain t-shirt, no lawyer, no fancy words. The judge laughs. The audience mocks him. They all thought he was just another kid who got caught hacking the school system. But then, he opened a folder. And what came next left the entire courtroom speechless. He didn't just defend himself, he exposed the real hacker, destroyed the case against him, and shocked even the judge with what he revealed. Who was this kid? And how did he outsmart everyone in the room? Watch the full story now on my channel Behind the Billions, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next shocking twist. Take that hoodie off, kid. This is a courtroom, not a playground. The gavel struck with a sharp bang. Next case. Judge Ronald Pierce called out, scanning the docket without lifting his head. The wooden courtroom, glowing in warm sunlight, shifted with anticipation as a new figure stepped forward. But instead of a defense attorney in a tailored suit, all eyes landed on a young black teenager, slim, silent, and wearing nothing but a plain, slightly wrinkled khaki t-shirt and jeans. His back was straight, his shoulders tense, but his hands trembled just slightly as he stood at the defendant's table. Judge Pierce furrowed his brow. "Where's your legal representation, son?" The bailiff stepped forward and answered before the boy could. "Your Honor," he says, "he'll be representing himself." A brief murmur swept through the courtroom. Some eyebrows lifted. A few chuckles slipped out from the suited audience in the back. Even the court stenographer seemed to pause in disbelief. The judge finally looked up and narrowed his eyes. "Let me get this straight, you're standing trial for criminal hacking charges, and you've come into my courtroom with no lawyer, no jacket, and no idea what you're doing?" The boy raised his head slowly. His voice was low, respectful, but unwavering. "Your Honor, I know exactly what I'm doing. My name is Jordan Michaels. I'm 17. I understand the charges against me. And yes, I'll be defending myself." Pierce blinked. A mix of irritation and intrigue crossed his face. "Do you realize this isn't a school project? You're accused of cybercrime, unauthorized access, altering school data, breaching secure networks. If convicted, you could be facing juvenile detention, or worse." Jordan nodded calmly. "I'm aware, Your Honor." The judge leaned forward now, studying him carefully. His white beard framed a stern but weathered face, one that had seen decades of trials, but rarely anything like this. A few people in the crowd snickered again. A man in the third row whispered, "What is this kid thinking?" But Jordan stood his ground. "Well then," the judge muttered, placing his gavel down slowly, "let the record show that the defendant has chosen to proceed pro se. This court will allow it, reluctantly." He looked directly at Jordan now. "I hope you're prepared, Mr. Michaels. Because this room doesn't play favorites. And we don't pull punches." Jordan didn't flinch. He opened a simple black folder he had brought with him, revealing neatly printed documents and notes. His eyes scanned the courtroom, locking briefly with those of the prosecutor, who still wore a smug grin. No one in that courtroom, not even Judge Pierce, realized what was about to unfold. Because the kid in the t-shirt? He wasn't lost. He was loaded, with knowledge, evidence, and a plan that would flip this trial upside down. A laughing courtroom turns uneasy. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Jordan Michaels stood, the only person in the room not dressed in a suit. His tan t-shirt looked plain, out of place among the polished shoes and silk ties. But he didn't seem to notice. Or care. The prosecutor, a tall man in a dark blue suit, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Your Honor," he said with a hint of sarcasm, "we're ready to proceed. Though I must admit, this is a first for me." Judge Pierce didn't smile. He tapped his pen against his notepad, eyes fixed on Jordan. "Mr. Michaels, you may begin. The floor is yours." Jordan stepped forward, gripping a few papers from his black folder. His hand still trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "Your Honor," he began, "the prosecution claims I hacked into Lincoln High's server to alter my grades. But I have here detailed network logs showing the breach originated from a different IP address, registered to a location 2 states away." He walked forward and handed the printed logs to the bailiff, who brought them to the judge. Jordan continued, "I've also requested and received the school's internal access logs under the Freedom of Information Act. According to those records, my student account was never active during the time of the breach." Judge Pierce raised an eyebrow, flipping through the documents. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. The smug smile on the prosecutor's face slowly faded. Jordan wasn't done. "Additionally," he said, looking toward the prosecution table, "I'd like to challenge the chain of custody for the digital evidence they submitted. There's no verifiable proof that the file logs weren't tampered with after they were extracted. The metadata is incomplete." Judge Pierce leaned back in his chair, the gavel resting near his hand, untouched. He looked closely at Jordan now, not as a kid in a t-shirt, but as someone who had done his homework. Someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Where did you learn to analyze digital metadata?" the judge asked, his tone no longer condescending, just curious. Jordan replied plainly, "I taught myself. My mom works nights. I stayed home a lot. Got interested in law after we went through an eviction case and couldn't afford legal help. I've been studying ever since." For a long moment, no one spoke. The prosecutor cleared his throat, trying to recover. "Objection, Your Honor, this is irrelevant." But Judge Pierce waved him off. "It's not irrelevant if the evidence holds." The silence in the courtroom was different now. The laughter had died. The whispers had stopped. People leaned in, suddenly realizing they weren't witnessing a boy about to embarrass himself. They were witnessing something extraordinary. Jordan adjusted the collar of his t-shirt and looked up confidently. The judge didn't say it out loud, but it was written all over his face. This wasn't going to be the easy open and shut case he thought it was. This young man had just changed the game, and he was only getting started. The genius nobody saw coming. The courtroom was still, like the moment before a storm hits. Everyone stared at Jordan Michaels, not as a teenager anymore, but as something else entirely. A force. Even the judge leaned forward now, glasses perched low on his nose, peering intently at the documents in front of him. "Mr. Michaels," he said slowly, "you said these network logs came from a third-party investigation?" Jordan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I contacted a cybersecurity professor at a nearby college. Sent him the file anonymously. He verified the breach had been rerouted through a proxy. He even included a report, signed and time-stamped. It's on page 5. Mouths opened. Eyes widened. The judge turned the pages. And sure enough, there it was. A formal digital forensic breakdown, marked with the college seal. Jordan wasn't bluffing. The prosecutor shuffled in his seat, clearly rattled. "Objection, Your Honor, this report should be inadmissible. He's a minor. He can't legally gather or submit expert evidence." Judge Pierce didn't look up. Actually, the rules of evidence don't prohibit a defendant, regardless of age, from introducing third-party expert materials. Especially if they're relevant, which, he held up the report, this clearly is. The prosecutor's mouth opened, then closed. He had no rebuttal. A woman sitting in the audience leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "How does a kid know all this?" Jordan stood quietly, letting the weight of his words settle. His hands were still at his sides, no fancy gestures, no shouting, just a calm, focused presence. Every sentence he spoke had precision. Furthermore, he continued, flipping to another document, the original accusation came from an anonymous email sent to the school board. That email contained screenshots supposedly proving my login was used. But if you look closely. He pulled out a magnified printout. The time stamps on the screenshots don't match the school server's active session logs. The screenshots were fabricated. The judge took a breath and looked up. How on earth did you catch that? I compared the metadata from the school's system with the screenshot's EXIF data. There were discrepancies in the time zone encoding. It's subtle, but enough to prove tampering. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was no longer a question of if this kid was smart. The real question was, how many steps ahead of everyone was he? Judge Pierce removed his glasses slowly. Mr. Michaels, how long have you been studying law? Jordan hesitated, then answered, about 2 years. I started reading case law after my mom was wrongfully evicted. I couldn't stop. It made sense to me. I've been teaching myself ever since. Pierce nodded, impressed but also humbled. And you're telling me, no legal background, no formal training, just reading? Jordan gave a small shrug. Books, internet, and lots of YouTube videos. The courtroom chuckled, not mocking this time, but amazed. The boy in the t-shirt had just dismantled the prosecution's narrative. Not with flash. Not with anger. With facts. With clarity. And with brilliance no one had seen coming. The courtroom turns in his favor. By now, every person in that oak-paneled courtroom was leaning forward, no longer watching a trial, but witnessing a transformation. Jordan Michaels wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was commanding the room. Judge Pierce looked over his glasses again, peering at the boy in the plain tan shirt. You said the screenshots were fabricated. Do you have any way to prove who sent them? Jordan nodded and flipped to the final page in his folder. I do, Your Honor. I traced the metadata from the original email that reported the incident. It was sent from a temporary burner account, but I managed to link it to a device ID associated with one of the school's IT assistants, someone I've had public disputes with. The judge blinked. The email domain was hosted through a shadow provider. Most people wouldn't catch that. But I did, Jordan added calmly, because I've been studying cybersecurity law for months. Gasps echoed again. This time, even the bailiff raised his eyebrows. The judge stared down at the evidence, flipping through the detailed breakdown Jordan had compiled. Packet routing. Device history. IP geolocation. All meticulously arranged. The teenager had effectively not only defended himself but had conducted a counter-investigation on par with a professional forensic analyst. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Your Honor, we request a recess to verify this new information. Judge Pierce didn't move. You've had ample time to prepare this case, counselor. This young man has just dismantled your argument with precision. Frankly, I'm more inclined to question how the original investigation was conducted in the first place. The prosecutor fell silent. The air in the room shifted. The judge looked back at Jordan, something like admiration growing in his eyes. You realize what you've done here? You've taken legal procedures, digital forensics, and case precedent, and used them to build a defense stronger than many practicing attorneys. Jordan stood still. He didn't gloat. He didn't grin. He just said, I didn't have a choice. A pause followed, the kind of silence that says everything. I've seen what happens when people don't fight back, he added. When no one listens. When the system assumes you're guilty because of where you live, or what you wear, or how young you are. The room was silent again. Not because no one had anything to say. Because Jordan had already said it all. Judge Pierce closed the folder slowly. I underestimated you, Mr. Michaels. Jordan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in that courtroom, and maybe in his life, he wasn't being underestimated anymore. He was being heard. And the truth, backed by knowledge and courage, was turning the tide in his favor. From laughter to standing ovation. The courtroom, once filled with skeptical stares and quiet snickers, now sat in total silence. Judge Pierce leaned back in his chair, the thick file of evidence from Jordan spread out across his bench. He was no longer judging a kid in a t-shirt. He was studying a strategist, a self-taught legal mind, and a master of calm under pressure. Jordan stood steady, shoulders back, eyes forward, never once raising his voice. Every move he made had been deliberate. Every fact, airtight. The prosecutor looked like he'd aged 10 years. His earlier arrogance had drained into panic. He flipped through his notes, searching for some point of attack, but there were none. Jordan had covered every angle. Finally, Judge Pierce looked up, his voice measured. "Mr. Michaels, after reviewing all submitted materials, this court finds that not only is there insufficient evidence to proceed, but there are also serious questions about the legitimacy of the accusations made against you." A few people in the courtroom gasped. "In fact," Pierce continued, "it appears that you've not only defended yourself, but uncovered a possible attempt to frame you. And you did so with a level of detail and professionalism that rivals seasoned attorneys." Jordan didn't smile. He just nodded respectfully, hands at his sides. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Case dismissed." He raised the gavel, and brought it down. Bang! And just like that, the storm was over. But then something unexpected happened. A man in the back row stood up and began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder. Then another joined him. And another. Within seconds, the entire courtroom was on its feet, applauding this 17-year-old who had walked into the fire and walked out untouched. Jordan looked around, almost unsure what to do. The judge leaned forward once more, but this time his voice was softer. "Mr. Michaels, have you considered law school? You clearly don't belong in front of the bench, you belong behind it." Jordan finally let the corners of his mouth curl into the smallest, most genuine smile. "I have. This was kind of my first test run." The judge chuckled. "Well, if this was a test, you passed with honors." As people filed out of the courtroom, reporters pushed to the front, asking for interviews. Parents pulled their kids closer, whispering, "That's the boy I was telling you about." And Jordan? He simply packed up his folder and walked out, no suit, no tie, no fanfare. Just truth. And a future wide open. Because in a world where assumptions are made based on clothing, age, or background, Jordan Michaels had done more than win a case. He had shattered expectations. And reminded everyone that genius doesn't always wear a robe or a badge. Sometimes, it just walks in wearing a plain t-shirt. And changes everything.